Happy Friday po sa inyong lahat. We are on the 3rd of September 2021 at pinagdiriwang natin ngayon ang memorial ni Saint Gregory the Great, Pope and Doctor on Friday of week 22 in ordinary time. Halipa kayo, samahan ninyo ako sa daily reading reflections ng ating banal na misa. Sa ating first reading from the letter of St. Paul to the Colossians, chapter 1, verses 15 to 20, ang pinaka-gist po ng first reading na ito ay in Him were created all things. Sino itong Him na ito? Si Jesus. No? God the Father created the world or all things in Jesus, in God the Son. So basahin natin ang first reading. Brothers and sisters, Christ Jesus is the image of the invisible God. So si Jesus ay image ng Diyos na hindi nakikita. The firstborn of all creation. For in Him were created all things in heaven and on earth, the visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers, all things were created through Him and for Him. He is before all things, and in Him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. So si Kristo ang Pangulo, kaya nga Pangulo na ulo. Siya ang Pangulo ng simbahan at ang simbahan ay ang katawan. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in all things He Himself might be preeminent. For in Him all the fullness was pleased to dwell, and through Him to reconcile all things for Him, making peace by the blood of His cross, through Him, whether those on earth or those in heaven. Ano kaya ang ibig sabihin ng ating first reading? So once again, let's go to the commentary of this first reading. Holy and blameless, sa verse 22. Once pagans and enemies of God, the baptized Colossians have been separated from sin and consecrated to the Lord. So dati-rati mga pagano ang mga Colossians at kaaway ng Diyos, mga kaaway ng Diyos. Ngayon, dahil sila'y nabinyagan, ngayon they have now been separated from sin, no? And consecrated to the Lord. Yan lang naman ng kaaway ng Lord, ang kasalanan. Sa verse 23, preach to every creature. Rhetorical exaggeration for the first century, but nevertheless the goal of Christ's missionary mandate. Paul is describing the future as though it has already happened, perhaps as a way of emphasizing So sorry po, mali po yung ating kinoment para pala sa bukas yun. Okay? So, burahin po ninyo yung mga commentary ng first reading. He is the image. Si Jesus is the image. Christ makes visible the life and love of the invisible God. Yung buhay at pagmamahal ng Diyos na hindi nakikita ay ginawang nakikita ni Kristo. His humanity is thus the sacrament that brings the Father into view. Ang pagiging tao ni Kristo ay parang isang sakramento. No? Although man was created in God's image, something more is said of Christ, who is that image in the most perfect sense. Kung ang tao ay created in the image and likeness of God, how much more with Jesus? No? He is the image of God in the most perfect sense. The hymn may allude to the creation of Adam, the first man, to bear the image of God and pass it along to his progeny, because the image Adam bequeathed to the human family was damaged and disfigured by sin. Christ comes to reverse what Adam did by reshaping our image in the likeness of his own. Christ is the image because he is of one substance with the Father. He comes from the Father and not the Father from him. Since the nature of an image is to copy the original and to be named after. The firstborn, the term for an eldest child with emphasis on his legal right of inheritance. Since Christ is the first and only natural Son begotten of the Father, he is the designated heir of the Father's estate, which is the entire cosmos. Paul's point is not that Jesus is the noblest part of creation, but that Jesus has the filial right to possess all of creation as his inheritance. Hindi ibig sabihin ni Saint Paul na si Jesus ay part ng creation, kundi merong karapatan bilang anak na pagmamay-ari niya ang creation as his inheritance. The apostle calls him the firstborn of all creation. Notice he says firstborn, not first created, that we may believe he is begotten in virtue of his nature and first in virtue of his eternity. Yan, yung firstborn, born of the Father, before all ages. The reference here is to the divine person of the Word. Of all creation, the unancient hymn that extols Christ's deity and supremacy over creation. Emphasis is placed on his role as creator, through whom all things were made, and as Redeemer who renews all things with his grace. As a preeminent Lord, Christ is enthroned far above every power on earth and every order of angels in heaven. He has neither rival nor peer, and his redeeming work transforms the old creation into a new creation through his body, the universal church. The preexistence of Christ from eternity and his active role as creator together recall biblical poetry that personifies God's wisdom as a divine architect of heaven and earth. Paul associates Christ with wisdom also in Colossians chapter 2 verse 3 and 1 Corinthians chapter 1 verse 24. Yan, thrones, dominions, principalities, authorities. Narinig nyo yan. Anong ibig sabihin ng mga yan? Names for various classes of angels. So, angel, archangel, thrones, dominions, principalities, authorities. No distinction is made here between blessed angels and demonic spirits, since Paul points that Christ reigns supreme over the entire host of benevolent and malevolent spirits, for the order of the angelic choirs in Catholic tradition. He is the head, sa verse 8, and it points to Christ's union with the church. Kaya tawag ni St. Augustine dyan, totus Christus, the total Christ. Who is the total Christ? Christ the head and his body, the church. So when you talk of Christ, you also talk of the church, no? The totus Christus, the total Christ. Christ is inseparable of his church. Who as head directs and oversees the activities of his members. Paul's analogy can likewise stress that the head and body share the same life, and that each member of the body is assigned a particular task for the good of the whole. Firstborn from the dead, Christ was the first to be raised immortal from the grave. This mystery of faith is reproduced in the lives of believers as their souls are resurrected in grace through the sacraments, and their bodies as raised in glory on the last day. The fullness of God, so verse 19. Christ is fully divine because the plenitude of divine life, power, and holiness resides with him. This is one of the clearest assertions of Christ's deity in the New Testament. So si Kristo ay Diyos. No? Hindi yung sinasabi ng Iglesia ni Kristo o saksi na siya lamang ay isang tao. And finally, to reconcile, so verse 20. The death of Jesus restores peace between the Father and the human family. This friendship was interrupted by the rebellion of Adam, who stripped the family of man of its inheritance and caused disorder and corruption to prevail throughout the world. Harmony is now being restored as the grace of the new covenant permits and renews the cosmos. Now, as a response to the first reading, our responsorial psalm, Psalm 100, verses 1 to 5, come with joy into the presence of the Lord. So itong si Jesus na were created all things, we come with joy into His presence. Sing joyfully to the Lord, all you lands. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come before Him with joyful songs. Come with joy into the presence of the Lord. Know that the Lord is God. He made us His we are, His people, the flock He tends. Come with joy into the presence of the Lord. Enter His gates with thanksgiving, His courts with praise. Give thanks to Him. Bless His name. Come with joy into the presence of the Lord. For He is good, the Lord whose kindness endures forever, and His faithfulness to all generations. Come with joy into the presence of the Lord. Ngayon sa ating Ebanghelyo, Luke chapter 5 verses 33 to 39, ang pinaka-gist po ng ating Ebanghelyo ay when the bridegroom is taken away from them, then they will fast. Pag wala na si Jesus, yun ay magfa-fasting. No? Kasi kaya sa wedding, there is no fasting. Kaya nga sa misa ay ang confession is before the Mass ng mga mag-asawa at walang Lord have mercy. Sa liturgy ng Archdiocese of Tuguegarao, automatic na sa glory to God in the highest. So ngayon, samahan ninyo ako, pakinggan natin ang Ebanghelyo. The scribes and Pharisees said to Jesus, the disciples of John the Baptist fast often and offer prayers, and the disciples of the Pharisees do the same, but yours eat and drink. Jesus answered them, can you make the wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? But the days will come, and when the bridegroom is taken away from them, then they will fast in those days. And also told them a parable. No one tears a piece from a new cloth to patch an old one. Otherwise, he will tear the new, and the piece from it will not match the old cloth. Likewise, no one pours new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the new wine will burst the skins and will be spilled, and the skins will be ruined. Rather, new wine must be poured into fresh wineskins. And no one who has been drinking old wine desires new, for he says, the old is good. So ngayon, puntahan natin ang commentary ng ating nabasang Ebanghelyo. Yung una, sa verse 23, yours eat and drink. Fasting in the company of Jesus will be as insulting as fasting at a wedding feast. Meron bang hindi kakain sa wedding feast? No? It will nevertheless become important after His departure. So, andito pa si Kristo, kaya it's a time of joy, no? Kaya wala mo nang fasting. Okay? The bridegroom, Yahweh, was the divine husband of old covenant Israel. Jesus now assumes this role as a divine spouse of the church. Kaya ang asawa ni Kristo ay ang simbahan at ang asawa ng simbahan ay si Kristo. Kami mga pari, no? Mayroon rin kaming asawa. Ang asawa namin ay ang simbahan. Just as new garments and wine are incompatible with old garments and wineskins, so God's new covenant cannot coexist with the old. Allegorically, si St. Augustine, the old wineskins signify the disciples who would more easily burst than contain Jesus' heavenly teaching. Only after Pentecost do they become new skins enabled by the Spirit to store in themselves a greater fullness of grace and truth. So my dear teachers, my dear faculty or faculty staff, my dear learners, my dear parents. So itong si Kristo ay nilikha ng God the Father ang lahat ng bagay dito sa mundo. And we come with joy into the presence of this Jesus, the Son of God the Father. At itong Jesus na ito is also the bridegroom, no? Ang husband ng simbahan. So sana, my dear learners, my dear faculty and staff, my dear parents, sana si Jesus, no, ay napaka-importante sa atin. Siya ang sentro ng ating buhay. Siya yung bridegroom natin kasi all of us belong to the church. Siya yung asawa natin. Siya yung lover natin. Sana mahal na mahal natin si Jesus. So till tomorrow, see you again tomorrow.